Okay, can begin. I'm going to start with roll call first. So, and we know that Chair Lopez is not is absent today. So, Vice Chair Penalosa.
Present.
Subchair, Subcommittee Member Sarmiento.
I'm here.
And then in addition to the subcommittee members joining us today is Leslie Palmer, Dan Maldonado from Howland and Knight, Casey Elliott from Townsend Public Affairs, and Tony Cardenas from the League of California Cities, which I don't see that he's joining. Oh, yes, I do see it. Okay. Okay. Chair, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Now is the time for members of the public to speak on action items. Ms. Secretary, is there anyone wishing to speak?
I have no hands raised, and I also received no comments via email. So we can proceed.
All righty. Thank you for that. The first item on the agenda is item 1, which is to receive and file meeting minutes from the Legislative City Council Subcommittee special meeting held on February 17th, 2022.
I'll move it.
All right. I have a motion and I'll second it. Madam Secretary, do you need a roll call if it's just us two?
Yeah, no, it's just you two, so it's a unanimous consent, so I would mark those as approved.
Perfect. Matter approved 2-0 with Chair Lopez absent. The next item on the agenda is item 2, and it's to receive state and federal legislative updates. And first up, we have our federal update from our Howland and Knight. Leslie and Dan, are you guys on?
Yes, and we're joined by our colleague Lisa Barkovic as well.
Awesome.
Yes,
take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Penalosa. Thank you, Mayor Sarmiento. So nice to see you all, at least on video. I think it's a mark of how much things are happening in DC at the moment that a report that we prepared, about a week ago is, completely outdated at this point, because things have transpired so quickly, particularly in the last 10 days. A couple of highlights though, and then happy to kind of have a conversation. For appropriations, last month the Appropriations Committee completed the markups of all of their 12 spending bills. And last week, they were able to pass a package of 6 of them, including the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee bill, which includes a $2.5 million earmark for the city of Santa Ana from Congressman Correa. And we worked really closely with Congressman Correa's team on getting this, sorry, I said earmark and I should say community project funding, but to get this investment for the city. And this is going to support the installation of a wireless network throughout the city's business improvement district. It's also going to provide funding to upgrade some of the downtown parking facilities for the businesses. And this is really a huge, it's a really significant investment. Depending on what happens, if the House and Senate are able to come to an agreement on the final package at the end of the year, we feel confident that this will be included as part of that final package. Again, the big if and the big question mark right now is, can they get to a deal? They still have not, Senate and House have not agreed on top line numbers at this point. And so they're going to be negotiating throughout August. We fully expect to see a continuing resolution in September to give them more time to figure out the funding. But really, really exciting to see this project included. Senator Padilla had advanced 2 projects for us to the Senate Appropriations Committee. One was a $2 million project for the First Street Slope Stabilization and Pedestrian Improvement Project. Another was $2 million for the historic Cypress Fire Station restoration to help transform that into a community development center. Unfortunately, those were not picked up by the Appropriations Committee, which released their reports last week. And, part of this dynamic is that the Senate and Lisa, I know, is going to talk a little bit in more detail. The Senate ended up using much lower numbers than the House. Part of this is an effort to try to land on where they think the final deal will be. But let me turn it to Lisa just to give you a little bit of insight into what's going on the Senate side. Lisa?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. So the Senate took a different approach than what they did last year. So if you look at the number of earmarks, for example, in the Senate Transportation Appropriations Bill, the Senate actually plussed up a lot more of the actual programmatic and competitive grant programs than what the House had proposed for. But instead, what they did was they provided a lot less money for the congressionally directed spending projects for senators to have for their pet projects. So if you look at last year's Senate Thud bill, when it came out, Senator Feinstein had 15 projects included, same with Senator Padilla. And this bill, Senator Feinstein only had 5 projects and Senator Padilla had 12. So obviously a much more competitive process on the Senate for this time around, but obviously a lot of this stuff is still going to be negotiated out, like Leslie said, for the next couple of months. To determine where they're going to kind of leverage between the House differences and the Senate differences on that.
And the only thing I would add is that it, in light of that the House markup to 2.5 million for this project is extraordinary from that standpoint. So I think that, it was a effort by everybody to kind of pull that piece together for the business community. To try to take the two strong problems and try to address it in some positive way.
Great.
Leslie, can I ask you really quickly, the 2.5 that you're referring to, is that Correa's effort for the wireless in downtown?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. What was it? When did it start?
In the district, the business district that you've identified.
No, you said, but it grew to 2.5. What was it? What was his initial ask on that?
It was 2.5.
It was 2.5 million.
Yeah.
I think what Dan's saying, just to elaborate on what Dan's saying, is that that was actually on the very generous side in terms of where projects were landing for community project funding this year. So he really put you guys on the higher end of what.
Thanks.
On the reconciliation front, lots has changed in the last couple of days from when we wrote this report. When we had written it, Senator Manchin was ready to walk away from a deal, was essentially saying all he could support would be lowering prescription drug costs, and then a fix to the Affordable Care Act. And then, of course, in the last 72 hours, much has changed. And so we are now looking at a $369 billion investment in energy security and climate change programs over the next 10 years. And so they're calling, this bill the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. And there is, a lot to really be excited about. It's 1,000-page bill, but, we're talking about everything from, $9 billion for consumer home energy rebate programs to a $4,000 consumer tax credit for lower and middle income individuals to buy used clean vehicles, and up to $7,500 to buy a new vehicle, $1 billion grant program to make affordable housing more energy efficient. We're talking about creating new grant programs in the environmental justice space, including $3 billion for environmental and climate justice block grants. A new $3 billion program, a competitive grant program that would be the Neighborhood Access and Equity Grant Program. $1 billion to change your fleet, particularly for heavy duty vehicles like garbage trucks. So really just a number of things that I think are going to align with the city's initiatives and providing even more opportunities than we've already had in IIJA to go after funding. And so at this point, the parliamentarian is now, giving what's known as a bird bath, where they're looking at all of the provisions to make sure that they comport with reconciliation. There's a little bit of a hiccup right now. Senator Sinema is raising some concerns about some of the pay-fors that are being used for the bill, but folks are feeling more confident for sure than I have heard throughout this entire time that they're going to get something over the finish line. I was just on the phone with a Senate staffer who was saying he thinks it's going to be likely vote Thursday, Friday, maybe Saturday. And then the House, which is recessing today, will come back into session to vote on a final package. But I think people are feeling very, very confident that they're going to get this package done. Lisa?
And also as part of that package is the continuation of the subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. So it will run for 3 years. So some stability on the financing of those subsidies, I think, is important, and a real plus for our community as well.
Thanks, Dan. So I'm going to kind of give you a brief update where we are with Congress on public safety police funding efforts. So as you know, President Biden signed into law at the end of last month major gun safety legislation, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And just kind of wanted to let you know, particularly for local governments, there is over $1.4 billion in the Office of Justice Program funding that was made available through the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. The Bureau of Justice Assistance is ready to give its spend plan of how it sees its money was set aside for FY22. They have to give that to Congress by August 9th. So for FY22, they have close to $300 million for a variety of programs. So one of the new programs, it will be $150 million. This is the Burn State Crisis Intervention Program. $40 million for BJA Stop School Violence Program. BJS, Bureau of Justice Statistics, they'll have $40 million for the National Criminal History Improvement Program. And OJP has an additional $50 million for the Community Violence Intervention Prevention Initiative, which is also a new program that just got kicked off this year, that really they're looking for local leadership and nonprofit organizations to lead on funding intervention prevention initiatives. Other things that have happened literally in the past 72 hours, particularly today, the House is poised to pass an assault weapons ban in the House. They just voted on a rule about an hour ago that passed to bring up same-day consideration of the assault weapons ban legislation. So that vote will occur later tonight, but the rule passed 217 to 211. Democrats only lost 3 members on that vote, and so the final vote on that assault weapons ban will look similar to that. The other thing that Congress is trying to move right now is legislation to provide additional funding to law enforcement. They tried to bring this bill up earlier this week, but there was continuing negotiations happening with the Congressional Black Caucus in terms of adding legislative provisions into the bill as it relates to accountability. And so Speaker Pelosi announced this afternoon that they have a deal, but in terms of timing, they will not bring it to the House floor until the second week of August. So stay tuned on that front. Leslie.
Just a couple things that I'll run through quickly. Finally, Congress was able to get to agreement on what used to be known as the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act and Competes Act, which is now the Chips and Science Act of 2022, which is significant investments in semiconductor manufacturing, along with major investments in National Science Foundation. There's also funding for workforce development in this space. And so there may be some opportunities here, less for the city, actually more for some of the city's partners, like Santa Ana College. There's significant investment for MSIs that are working in STEM. But so there may be a number of opportunities here where the city may want to partner to access some of these funds. A lot of this will be going out through competitive grants as well. And then finally, as we're talking about grants, there is a lot of open funding opportunities right now. We've been meeting with Public Works to talk about those opportunities, but at this moment in time, there is funding available for the Reconnecting Communities program. That grant program is open, due October 13th. The Safe Streets and Roads for All, that application is due September 15th. The Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program is also open. That's due October 4th. And so, again, these are all part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, all competitive grant opportunities. They will be available again next year, but as we know, it's best to get in early and start to get those applications in. So we've been working with Public Works on that and hoping that the city will be submitting some competitive applications for those. Let me take a break there and see if there are any questions.
Mr. Chair, you want me to go ahead and start briefly and I'll turn it over to you?
Yeah, I was going to say just thank you for that update and presentation. And I don't have questions at the moment, but Mayor, if you have some, please take it away.
That'd be great. Well, look, I want to kind of piggyback on some of the points you made at the last meeting, which were really good questions on some of our rescue plan dollars and how we can convert those into maybe some help for our merchants in the downtown that we already spoke about, where Correa's effort might be helpful. But before I do that, let me introduce my new policy that's going to be onboarding, or is in the process of onboarding, and she's here on the call. Her name is Alejandra Colon. Wave, Alejandra. And it's good. And so she will be helping us out, or helping me out here, and hopefully helping us out. But it's good to see a lot of you. I know you mentioned Public Works. Who's here from Public Works?
Mayor, we don't have anyone on the call today, but I've been working closely with their staff.
All right. Well, look, because a lot of the stuff I know that we mentioned at the last meeting involves Public Works, we should have somebody from their department on these calls, going forward, or on these meetings going forward. But one of the things I think that you all mentioned was obviously, efforts to the downtown, as you all know, for those of you that don't know, and I'm glad to see, our new director of Parks and Recs, Hawk Scott, and Judson from Housing, and everybody else. So look, there's major construction going on down there, and we're trying to see, and I think, Correa's bill is going to be helpful if we can get some monies for the wireless, but we're just trying to give them relief. We're trying to give them business interruption, temporary relief. And one of the questions I know in the minutes from the chair was, can we use any of the ARPA money, which we call Revive money, as business grant assistance? Because we've been using general fund money and taking away from other projects to convert them into grants so we can give these. And now we're up to we're up to 3 million. So look, we can't keep shaving things off. And maybe if there's, some way to use that. That's one question, and you don't have to answer it right now, but I just want to give you a list of things that, if you can follow back up with us on an email, that would be great. And maybe just copy the committee members and then copy the council. That was one. The other one was, so on OCTA, they're saying that they can't give business interruption grants, any direct assistance, monetary assistance to these businesses. But we know that there are projects, and there's one in LA, through, I think it's the Crenshaw line through Metro. And they have a business interruption grant for those businesses there. Unfortunately, they're 3 years behind. We're using the same contractor, so it doesn't look good for us. This may be an extended period of time. But I think I had asked for a meeting with Correa's office to talk about, can we approach FTA, because they're the funding source at the federal level that is telling OCTA that we can't give them, and I don't want us to do OCTA's work, but it also involves our merchants, and we're not the lead agency, but we're a partner agency. So that, I think we should research that. We're not, we're doing some work, but we're also doing this on behalf of residents that we represent, or stakeholders that we represent, and we're also a minority partner in this project. So if you can maybe see what your thoughts are and maybe research that issue. Can local, transportation authority agencies give business grants when they're impacting, stakeholders with their projects? That should be a fairly narrow question, and it should be something that should be clear. But that was another one. The other sort of comment I had was on the assault weapons ban, and I know it's going to get out of the House. Can we do a letter of support to the Senate and make sure that Feinstein and Padilla have that, and maybe we'll bring it back to the council, so so they can consider it, and we can go ahead and give some letter of support for that. And since we have our Parks and Recs person, we're looking at acquiring some additional open space. We're looking at maybe, trying to acquire, possibly a golf course, that is owned by Garden Grove. That may or may not go anywhere. We also have some, a golf course of our own that we operate that we may discontinue operating once the lease expires, and then convert that to open space. But that's still going to take some money to operate it going forward, to retrofit it. So if you can maybe look at, what monies we might be eligible there. And then finally, I guess I would say on the whole, environmental justice front, we have a lot of remediation that we need to take care of, whether it's, groundwater contamination, whether it's lead, contamination in the soil. I know when I was with OCTA, we just litigated this stuff. And we went out and got private counsel on contingency, and they filed against the bad actors, and it took years. But we eventually settled, and those monies are now being used for remediation that's being done by EPA, both Cal and federal. So I just think that we may need to look at that and see what path Santa Ana has as a local agency to say, can we facilitate that litigation to clean some of this up. And these go back 40, 50 years. It's not perpetrators maybe right now that are doing it because there are now regulations, but I think that's something that we want to at least ask, right? What's the best path for us to get this done? Finally, I would just say, on the grants and everything else that we're applying, if we could get like in advance of these meetings, hey, this is, we just received this much, we applied for these 10 grants, 5 of them have already been met to this amount. That would be helpful just to give us, sort of almost a scoring sheet of how we're doing. That would go to both federal and state lobbyists, just so we have a summary of things. But hopefully that's something that will help us in the future, just to know how we're doing. And I just want to make sure our staff is being responsive to our federal and state advocates to make sure that we stay on top of these things. But that's really all I had. Sorry for the mouthful, but I think I don't need responses right now, but maybe things that can going forward. You can go ahead and get back to us and either copy the council, the committee members on this committee, or if you want to copy the entire council, whichever way works for everybody is fine with me. That's it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Sarmiento. And I want to say that I agree with everything that's been said, specifically in regards to, I know we mentioned public works, but also want to make sure, Daisy, that we connect with staff from planning and building because of the environmental justice component. From what I understand, as of last week, we have submitted for grants to try to get some funding to do our own study of the pollution and lead levels within our environmental justice corridor, which is critical to move forward and implementing plans that could best mitigate the different issues that we've been seeing. So not sure if either Townsend or Holland and Knight are aware of that, but we did submit for those grants, and I want to see how we could be helpful on that end to assure that we could get those monies so that we could properly conduct our own research here in the city. Thank you. That is it.
You're on mute, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, what was that?
Oh, I think you went on mute there for a little bit.
I did. Sorry about that. Okay, so if Leslie, is that it on your end?
I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, of course. And next up, we have B, which is a state level, Townsend Public Affairs. I see Casey on the line. Casey?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Casey Elliott with Townsend Public Affairs. Unlike Dan and Leslie and Lisa out there in Sacramento, it's been a little quiet. The legislature's been on recess for the month of July, so they will return back to session on Monday, where they'll have a quick 5-week sprint to the end of the legislative session. By the end of August, by midnight on the 31st, we will have dispensed with all bills in one form or another that's still outstanding. And then the legislature will adjourn until January. So real kind of quick sprint here coming up. That said, before the legislature adjourned on July 1st, they did a number of different things. Most notably was they approved the state budget. The budget in total was about $234 billion in general fund spending, which was a 3% increase over the prior year. As you're aware, the conversation leading up to the budget conversation, to the final budget, was this large state surplus. How was it going to be used? Ultimately, about 95% of that funding was utilized in one-time fashions. So a lot of re-upping of existing grant programs, various funding items. Not a lot of what we would consider new programs were included in this year's budget. When we kind of look specifically at the city, what's going to be beneficial to the city, what's going to be beneficial to your residents, within the state budget, there were a number of legislative spending priorities. Again, at the state, we don't call them earmarks either, but legislative spending priorities. Of that, the city of Santa Ana received $9 million to modernize the Civic Center. So that was a good win. I know the city's been working with Senator Umberg on that for quite a while. So it was good to see that materialize within the budget. Additionally, there was another $5 million in funding sent over to the Santa Ana River Conservancy. So I think we can anticipate a grant program coming out in the coming months here for projects along the Santa Ana River. Also, a key item, Mayor Sarmiento was in Sacramento along with the big city mayors, definitely doing push on homeless funding. There was an additional year of $1 billion for the HHAP program included in the budget. A little funky in that last year was a 2-year funding cycle. So there was $1 billion in the current budget year for the HHAP program, of which Santa Ana's portion should be a little over 10 million. The $1 billion that was included in this year's budget is actually for next fiscal year. So again, we're looking at 23-24. And again, there'll be a large city allocation. So Santa Ana should be looking again at somewhere around 10 million in the next calendar year as well. So some good chunks of funding. In addition, I think we're going to see a lot of various grant programs come online, in the second half of this calendar year, moving into the beginning of calendar year 23. Most notably, there was $700 million included for homeless funding for encampment resolution cleanup. That's going to be spread over 2 years. I know that was a very popular program that was included for the first time in last year's budget. Additionally, there's funding over 2 years, $550 million to increase broadband, access to broadband, both in rural and urban settings. And then this year, there was a significant funding in infrastructure, particularly transportation infrastructure. Last year, the legislature and the administration were unable to reach agreement primarily around high-speed rail, so there wasn't a transportation trailer bill last year. This year, the final budget includes $3.6 billion for transit for the TIRCP program, which will go out, and an additional $2 billion in each of the next 2 fiscal years for that program as well. So significant funding for transit coming up. Also $350 million for grade separations, $1 billion for ATP. So I'm sure that the city staff will stay busy with various programs to apply for. I know that we've been very successful in those in previous rounds. I did also want to note one of the key items that was amongst a conversation of negotiation between the legislature and the administration was fiscal relief, the inflationary relief package. That ultimately came together. Many residents, I would say the bulk of the residents within Santa Ana will be receiving some type of a funds from the state related to that inflation relief package. Ultimately, $9.5 billion is going to go out statewide for individuals. It's on a sliding scale. So it applies to individuals making up to 250,000, joint filers making up to 500,000. And then depending upon how you file, if you have any dependents, a single individual will receive a check of $350 if they make up to 75,000. Now scale down to $200. That'll be doubled if they're a joint filer, and then another chunk if they have any dependents. So if you have a joint filed household with one dependent making under $150,000 a year, they'll be receiving just over $1,000. So, so all of those funds, I know the state's working on processing that. I would anticipate we're probably going to see those checks in people's hands in their bank accounts, likely in the late September to early October timeframe. So, so some of that relief should be coming soon. I know Mayor Sarmiento mentioned businesses. There was some funding provided for business relief. It's still related to COVID. There was $250 million in grants provided for small businesses to help offset some of the supplemental paid sick leave that was approved earlier this year. So while not directly for some of the business assistance that the city is looking at, some of those businesses may be able to apply for funding under these programs. So I'll make sure to send that information over to staff as well. And then the last thing I did want to note was there was an additional, as it relates to public safety, there was some additional funding provided in this year's budget, $40 million to help support local gun buyback programs. So I think we can see the Department of Justice will be rolling that out. Typically they work with established local buyback programs. So I think we'll probably see something rolling out from Department of Justice again between now and the end of the year. Moving slightly to the policy side, as I noted, the legislature, when they return on Monday, they'll have 4 weeks to dispense with all bills that are still active. All bills right now are either in the Appropriations Committee for evaluation of their fiscal impacts or are on the floor of the Assembly and Senate for consideration. Just a few very quick bills I wanted to highlight. One of the bills that we've been working on is related to housing, AB 2011, which would allow for streamlined and by right affordable housing and other housing developments in retail and commercial zones. That measure has had a large amount of opposition given some of the labor provisions that are in it. Right now, the author has attempted to include prevailing wage and skilled and trade language within the bill. However, not all labor are pleased with those provisions. So there's been a lot of labor intra-fighting on that bill. We have had numerous conversations with the author's office related to some of the local government provisions, trying to, I know that on behalf of the city, we've asked that that bill be tied to SB 35, so those good actors in meeting their RENA numbers can get some consideration on this bill. As of yet, that has not made it in. The author has been, talking about delaying implementation to allow local governments to accommodate these bills. They've been looking at things like adding historical districts, but I think the bulk of this bill is movement on this bill, if there is any, is going to be related to labor provisions. Similarly, there's another bill, SB 6 by Senator Caballero, which is currently in the Assembly on a similar topic about citing housing and affordable housing within mixed use and commercial zones. That bill has some provisions that are more friendly to the city in that bill would allow housing to be an allowable use as opposed to a use by right, which then would mean that the city would have some level of control over the zoning, design, and other standards that those projects would have to meet. Additionally, under that bill, it really ties everything to SB 35. So it makes these projects an allowable use under SB 35. In that, the city is meeting its RENA obligations and receives some exemptions from 35. The city would still, under SB 6, would remain have some control over the projects, where they're sited, how they look, and those types of elements. SB 6 also does have some more stringent prevailing wage and skilled and trained provisions in it, and as such, the opponents of 2011 on the labor side are supportive of SB 6. So At some point, those two bills will, if either of them are going to move in the next month, we would expect to see some level of reconciliation. So obviously, we'll keep the city apprised on that. And then the last bill I wanted to touch on is SB 1338, which is a bill that would implement the CARES Corp proposal from the governor's budget. Senator Umberg has been carrying this bill. This bill continues to move forward. It's in the Appropriations Committee. It has been one of the governor's top priorities for this year to move that bill through, so it keeps moving. There has been some discussion about, particularly from the county side, wanting to narrow it down to be a pilot program to really focus in those areas of the state that may have the resources to make a program like this successful. At this point, the bill is still statewide. It is still a top priority of the governor, so I anticipate that we'll see the administration flexing some muscle here at the end of session to try to make sure that that bill moves out of the legislature in a way that they're supportive of and can sign it when it comes down to him. So with that, I will take a breath and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Casey, for that update. Very thorough and informative. The one question that I had, and it's indirectly related to Santa Ana is the, I know I see Judson on the call, and I also represent our city on the Orange County Housing Finance Trust. And I know that we had a funding request to the state that was not approved in the governor's final budget. And I know you're very familiar with what I'm talking about, because I think you also represent us at the Orange County Housing Finance Trust. And given that, I believe every state legislature in the county signed a support letter for this, and it ended up not being in the final budget. I mean, can we, and I know that cities like Santa Ana and the region rely on all the funding and all the good work that we're doing on the trust to fund these permanent supportive housing units and affordable housing complexes, which we have plenty in construction in Santa Ana now. Is there any possibility still where we could still secure some of that funding on the trust side?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the delegation was great. They all signed on to a request for, I believe it was $30 million for the trust. As you noted, that wasn't included in the final budget agreement. We're continuing to have conversations with budget staff, with the Department of Finance. There is a high likelihood that there will be a budget trailer bill here before the end of the year. Unclear if that's going to present an opportunity for another round of earmarks or inclusion of earmarks that weren't there, but we're definitely working with the members of the delegation, the budget committees, and the Department of Finance to see if that is an avenue that we could still get something in on that request. Whether it's 30 or it has to get scaled back I think would largely depend upon how those conversations go. But there may be another bite at the apple here before the end of session that we're making sure we're going to kind of run all the traps on. Otherwise, we'd be looking at, once the legislature returns in January, trying to get something in a mid-year trailer bill at the January timeframe.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Casey. I know that would be critically important. I mean, all the funding requests and funding approved in the budget that you mentioned is important, but given the numerous state mandates of housing and building and affordable housing, I know that the trust is doing a lot of work throughout the region to make sure that our cities are meeting those requirements, and anything you guys can help there, that'd be great. Yeah, that is it for me. Mayor Sarmiento, do you have any questions or comments for Casey?
Yeah, just to follow up on what you said. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on the 10 million, Casey, when you were talking about the 1 billion allocation for homelessness services, I believe this is HAP money, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So is it 10 million to us over the 2 years, or is it 10 million per year? That's where the formula broke down for me. I couldn't really figure it out.
Yeah, sorry about that. I should have clarified. Based on last year's, on round 3, which was $1 billion round, the city received, I believe it was 10.3. Judson may have a better idea, but I want to say it was around 10.3. So based on that $1 billion factor from last year, the city should be getting about 10.3 again. I think that they may be using the updated point in time count, so that may get moved around slightly, but it should be around 10 million per year. So that'd be 10 in the new current budget year, and then 10 in next budget year as well.
Got it. And to the chair's point, I know that we've used other HAP money in the past to just fund our navigation center. Are we going to be using this for any acquisition, conversion of any motels and hotels in the future to go ahead and create some PSHs? Staff?
Yeah.
Oh, go
Sorry.
ahead, Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The priority is on the navigation center. That's been the priority since day one with all the rounds of HAP funds. But with this new investment, it gives us additional opportunity to expand our opportunities to possibly acquire a motel or use the funds for affordable housing development.
All right. Well, look, if we can kind of just guide you along First Street, I know that, maybe that the chair will agree. We have some good candidates along that corridor. I think all of us have said, I mean, there's plenty in the city, but there's sort of a concentration of them there. And if we can, make some headway into knocking down a couple more or acquiring a couple more, I guess, and converting them, that would be something I'd be really supportive of. So that's good. On the 9 million that Senator Umberg has been championing for us for the Civic Center. See if you can help out with DGS. I know when Daisy and I and some other staff and others met with them, they keep stalling a little bit, and they and it seems like it's first impression conversation every time we meet, and we've been talking about this now for probably over a year. But if you can, I saw Zach from the governor's office yesterday, and I told him the same thing. I said, man, give us a hand with with the department. I know they're swamped, but just so they don't see this as, we've never seen your application, or we never heard of this thing. We already have some property that could be swapped out for that state building. So, I mean, look, things have been lined up for a while. So if you can, help us with them. The inflation relief package, you said checks should be sent out September, October?
September, October is kind of what I'm hearing. They need to work with the state controller and the Department of Tax and Fee just to make sure that they kind of know the universe of everyone who's getting the appropriate amount. So from what I'm hearing, probably around that September, October timeframe.
Can we, is there any way we can quantify as a city how much money we would be receiving sort of aggregately based upon our, AMI and, I would think maybe 80% of our residents are going to be qualifying for this. So it is going to be a huge injection of money, into people's pockets. And that's commerce, that's, investment, that's, sales tax, that's all these different things. But is there any way we can figure that out?
Yeah, I'm happy to work with staff to see if they have some general AMI data and population stuff. I can probably give you a rough estimate. Mm-hmm. That'd be great.
And finally, what I would say is on the gun buyback. I mean, I know the chair and I were there at the last one. We had over 500 people show up, and so it was a huge success, because the previous one, I think a few years back, I think it was only 120 people that showed up, but this one I think was almost 4 times that. But you had some people coming in, with like 10 guns, right? And they got 300 gift cards for each gun. That's $3,000 that some people walked away with. But some of these guns were like muskets, right? They were like old, ancient guns that probably would never fire again. So it was a little odd. And I just saw a lot of people from outside the city. And what made me a little nervous was that we used Revive money, which is rescue plan money. And that was intended for COVID relief, right? So back again to the point, can we use COVID relief money for business interruption grants or something other than COVID relief or COVID recovery? I just thought that the nexus was a little bit thin on the gun buyback and the and using those monies. So look, I think for the next buyback, we definitely stick to these monies that have been allocated from the state specifically for this use, and then save the Revive ARPA monies for what they were intended, which was COVID relief. I mean, if there's that much flexibility in these funds, we should be using them for business interruption grants. Then I don't know if Leslie or Dan are still on the line, but I remember that question being asked at the last meeting. So maybe I interrupted you and you had an answer to that. But that's something I would say is that let's really keep the sort of the nexus, tight with some of these things. And last thing, I see Jason on the line. So Jason, you probably have some, list of public works projects that are priority projects in order of importance. And I know that's I think what we all wanted to make sure, our advocates had, so they could go ahead and, advocate accordingly. Right. So, so hopefully they have something like that. I just forgot that when we were talking about the federal update.
Sure, we have a number of projects that we have for the last few years been pursuing. One of the top priorities has been the Santa Ana Boulevard grade separation. We actually have engaged with a grant writing team to apply for 4 grants in that regard. And I can share their latest, I just received their latest funding matrix of possible funding sources. And that was informed by a call we had with Leslie a few weeks ago. So I can share that with staff and with council to show them what we're pursuing there. Additionally, we have the Bristol Corridor, which we're looking to wrap up as quickly as possible, but there is one unfunded phase north of 17th Street, which is I guess a policy decision about how we want to approach that and what we want to do there. It's between 17th all the way up to Santiago Creek, which would be the kind of the last segment of Bristol. Nothing has been funded in that segment yet. The other one is Grand Avenue between 4th and 17th Street, and possibly further north. We're actually working with Caltrans on a potential grant to fund that project in some form, but we would probably need additional monies. Bigger picture, longer term, there is an Alton Overcrossing project, which is a joint project between the city and Irvine. It's based on the impacts of the future development meeting certain thresholds in the IBC or Irvine Business Complex on their side, and its impacts to the roads in Santa Ana. The focus of that overcrossing is to mitigate any traffic impacts related to that. So that is another project that is not funded at this time, but would require a concerted effort on the regional, state, and federal level to fund that. So.
All right. That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. To add to your point, you had to have been in the room yesterday with my one-on-one with Christine Ridge, our city manager. I brought up that very point about the gun buyback and my head, kind of questioning us using those funds for that purpose, because I also, all the people that were coming in did not look like your average Santa Ana resident. Looked, a lot of Huntington Beach stickers on the cars, and so and I know that the funding was earmarked for census tract areas and direct assistance. So I was also kind of questioning that. So I'm happy you brought that up, and I hope that we could get some clarity there. And Jason, just a point of clarification. You mentioned Bristol Corridor. From my previous conversations with Nabil, I recall that he mentioned that the only stretch that was unfunded was between St. Andrew and Warner on Bristol, which is what I always harp about, about Bristol being under construction since I was in diapers, literally. But is there another part of Bristol, you said north, that is also unfunded?
So the ultimate vision for Bristol was to widen the roadway from Memory Lane all the way down to Warner.
Okay.
The segment north of 17th Street was excluded from a cooperative agreement with OCTA, which has been the primary funding source. The reason being is that agreement was based on the old Centerline project, which preceded the streetcar. Mm-hmm. And that looked at some kind of light rail streetcar extending to Santa Ana College, and it didn't extend further north than that. So that's why it was always constrained to south of 17th Street.
Oh, okay. So I guess that's where I got a little confused. Okay, that's all I have for this. And I guess Casey, I mean, is there anything else you want to wrap up with?
That's it for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for the update. And the next item is agenda item 3, and it's receive League of California Cities update from the one and only Mr. Tony Cardenas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Penalosa. I will be brief. Just one of the budgetary items that we're still working on is we're asking the legislature to fund local governments $900 million. These are for unfunded state mandates. The last time the state paid up on these unfunded mandates was in 2004. These mandates range from public safety mandates, Brown Act mandates, record request mandates. According to the Secretary Controller's Office, Santana is owed $4.6 million. So that's a significant chunk of money. We're still fighting for this money. It hasn't been included in the state budget yet. So any way we can partner with your city, with the Big 13 during this month of August when the legislature is doing these budget negotiations, we'd love to. I did provide a matrix which highlights the money owed to your city. So I wasn't able to provide it in the chat, but I did provide it to your staff. The other thing I wanted to mention is one of the bills that we are working on that is very specific to Orange County is basically the legislative reaction to what happened in Anaheim over the stadium and the resignation of the mayor. It's Senator Umberg's SB 361. We do have an opposed unless amended position on the bill. We don't object to the increased transparency requirements in the bill for the Surplus Land Act, but we do have an objection to giving the Department of Housing and Community Development veto authority over these Surplus Land Act transactions. There's no shot clock on when they have a decision, so they can indefinitely hold up these projects. Not sure what impacts it would have on Willowick, but our perspective is it's just too broad of a bill. If there's any room for collaboration to communicate kind of this message to Senator Umberg, we would be all ears on it. I think the happy middle ground would be if the bill was specific to stadiums or those type of transactions that would certainly help with our opposition, but wanted to provide an update on SB 361. It's going to be heard on the 3rd of August. And just finally, real quickly, our board of directors did take a position on 2 ballot measures, Proposition 26 and 27. You've probably seen the commercials on both ballot measures. They deal with online gaming and sports betting and tribal casinos. We took a neutral position on Prop 26 and an opposed position on Prop 27. It does have impacts at the local level, particularly with those cities that have tribal casinos and card rooms. We don't have that in Orange County, but if your city is looking to take a position on either one, I'd be happy to provide our analyses on both ballot measures. With that, I did hear just some discussion on the Orange County Housing Finance Trust Fund. I actually did speak with the executive director a couple of days ago, Adam, because I was going to provide an update on the trust fund. The League of Cities, we're really looking for success stories on what cities and counties are doing to help the state achieve its housing goals. I would love to work with you, Chair Penalosa. He did commend your leadership on that, on the trust. So any way that the League can help, either through our statewide publications, just to market the good work that you guys are doing there, and any way how it could help in your budgetary requests, I'm happy to do that. And with that, I will end my presentation and take any questions if there are any.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Tony. And I mean, whenever you'd like, I'd love, we have a meeting we'll bring in Judson so we could go over all the great projects in Santa Ana alone that have been funded by the Orange County Housing Finance Trust, among numerous other funding sources. But, Wise Place is one of them most recently, which we're all familiar with, over off of Broadway, and big affordable housing project as well on Fairview and Westminster Avenue in Santa Ana as well. So a lot of good work, but thank you for that. We'll make sure to connect and schedule a meeting with Judson and staff so we could go over that. And with that said, Mr. Mayor, do you have any questions or updates for or comments for Tony?
No, man, I just didn't. How did, our unreimbursed cost is almost $2 million over Anaheim's. That's crazy. And, so what is that attributed is it all the PRAs, you think, all that cost, or where's that coming?
Yeah, that cost is really depends on the reimbursement requests that cities send. So it seems like your city has been on top of sending reimbursement requests to the state. That's why the state controller has 4.6 million saying that it's owed to you since 2004.
If I may, Mayor, a lot of it is related to PD activities like crime statistic reports, identity theft, peace officer, Bill of Rights, stuff like that. So we have the whole list of claims that make up the 4.6 million. And yeah, a lot of it's related to PD activities.
Well, thank you. And look, I would just say, we should do what we can. Maybe, Mr. Chair, we send something from the council, whatever, staff needs support on as they consider this. And maybe, Daisy, we do this through the BCM as well. It makes sense that 4.6 is a big number.
Yes, and I'm happy to provide our budgetary request letter to your staff as well, just as a backup document.
That's
Great.
it.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that, Mayor.
And I'll move the items. Do we need to move anything, or is it just to receive and file?
Just receive and file.
I guess, yeah, I didn't even move item 2. Did we need them? We don't need to, right?
No, not for
Okay.
the updates.
All right, so next on the agenda is item 4, which is to review and discuss our bylaws. Tony, thank you, by the way, before we move on, thank you so much. Next is to review and discuss our bylaws adopted back in 2017. Is there Angie or staff, do you guys have are we gonna just discuss the bylaws that were adopted then?
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, since Chair Lopez is not here today, staff's recommendation is to table this when we have the entire body here.
Sounds good. I'm fine with that. So we'll continue item 4 to the next scheduled Legislative Affairs Subcommittee meeting, whenever that will be.
Okay. And that is the next item on the agenda. So it's up to the committee if they would like this to start the clock on when we meet quarterly, and then we just schedule the next meeting next quarter, or if you have a different time frame on when you'd like to meet next.
I guess, is the review and discussion of bylaws, is that something that is urgent?
No.
You said no or yes?
It's not.
Okay, so I guess whenever, maybe communicate with Holland and I and Townsend and see when would unless Mayor, you have some suggestions.
No, I agree with you. I think maybe we just go out another quarter, but there are some things that we ask that, you can maybe circulate to us by email in the interim. So I didn't see anything really time sensitive on this. I just think, we may need some letters of support on some things, but I'm fine with pushing it to the next quarter.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with that too. Daisy and Angie. So I guess this doesn't require a motion either. That brings us to subcommittee member comments. Mr. Mayor, do you have any member comments that you'd like to add?
None. Just good to see everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I don't either. Thank you so much, everybody, for putting this meeting together and for those being present. This meeting is now adjourned.
Take care, everybody.
See you later.